The 15th verse, which we last did, Angam galitam phalitam mundam dashana vihinam jatam tundam vruddho yati grihitva dandam adapina munchat ashapindam, yet the mass of desires leaves not. So the body has been worn out, has become decrepit, head turned grey, mouth has become toothless. Support of a staff, the old man moves about, yet the bundle of desires leaves not. Go to a person who is in that old age and ask him, has he burnt away the desires through the course of his life? So the verse here conveys someone who has led an indulgent life, and just by leading an indulgent life, there is no guarantee that you will exhaust your desires. In fact, as we understand the science behind indulgence, whenever you indulge in anything, now first and foremost, we got to be very clear as to what is indulgence. Now many people, in fact not many people, most people, if not that small percentage of people, most people define indulgence at the physical level. They think indulgence is a quantitative contact with sense objects. So it is not a quantitative measurement. Indulgence is purely mental. So by mentally indulging in the sense enjoyments is no way to get rid of your latent desires. In fact, take a note of this definition, the subtle difference. Can you all view the PowerPoint? What is the difference between indulgence vis-a-vis reflection? Indulgence is defined as an uncontrolled, indisciplined, unconscious thought flow. I repeat, indulgence is defined as an uncontrolled, indisciplined, unconscious thought flow. Now this is the realm of your mind. But when the same thought pattern becomes controlled, it is discipline and a conscious process, then it becomes reflection. So when you lead an indulgent life, mentally, it creates desires. The more you indulge, the more you strengthen the desires. It's like adding fuel to fire. And no fire will ever say, thank you very much, I don't want no more. The fire will keep consuming, the fire keeps rising until it consumes you. And that's what desires are. Desires, the more you feed them, the more you ride on them, the more you give in to them, the more the desires keep getting strengthened, they get stronger, ultimately you become a victim of them and it destroys you. But on the contrary, when you get hold of your thoughts, you become a master of them. When your thoughts become controlled and disciplined, that is when you start, it becomes it becomes controlled, it becomes disciplined. And what reflection does, reflection actually gets rid of your desires. So this is the process you must understand. In fact, you spiritually are made or broken in these two approaches to life. Real spirituality is here. How you behave, how your thoughts are behaved, how your thoughts are managed, how your thoughts are harnessed. So reflection is done by the intellect, the indulgence is done by the mind. So we took a reference of Rajneesh. He is a very powerful propounder of this thought, and as we did understand, when you indulge in something, you get temporarily suffocated with it, but that doesn't mean you have lost a wanting for it, or the object has lost a charm for you. You still have a deep desire, you still have a great value for it. Just a matter of time, the desire comes back. Just like I took the example of a cold-stricken snake. A cold-stricken snake gets frozen in that extreme cold temperatures. It becomes like a rubber snake, literally dead. But the moment the first light falls on it, the sun rays, it starts warming up, it gets back its life and starts hissing again. It's like a dormant, apparent dead desire wakes up when it finds the warmth of the sense objects. So beware of the desires going into unmanifestation. So the only way you find out whether you still have a desire is to expose yourself to the marketplace. That's the only way you find out whether you have a desire or not, isn't it? Even by exposing yourself to the marketplace, if there is no arousal of any thoughts and desires in you, that is how you know that there is no desire in you. Now, what we conclude is, don't be fooled by chasing desires, but you will not be able to get rid of your desires through indulgence. Okay, that was the message in verse 15. So let's move on. We shall take the 16th verse. Agreva nihi prushthe bhanuh ratrau chubukasa marpita januh karatala bhiksha starutala vasaha tadapi namuncha tyasha pashaha. Agre vahnihi prushthe bhanuh ratrau chubukasa marpita januh karatala bhiksha starutala vasaha tadapi namuncha tyasha pashaha. Now the word says fire in front, agre vahnihi, prushthe bhanuh, the sun behind, ratrau chubuka samarpita januh, knees tucked to chin at night, karatala bhiksha, receiving alms in palms, tarutala vasaha, living under trees. And again the last sentence is the same as the previous verse, tadapini munchat asha pasha. In the previous verse he said tadapini munchat asha pindam. Here he says yet the noose of desires leaves not. Noose means it's something that gets hold of you. It doesn't lose its grip on you. So as is stated, this verse talks of someone who has fooled himself by living a life of extreme austerity. So here he is picturizing. Now you got to visualize. You got to visualize what is he trying to picturize. Here he is trying to picturize an ascetic who denies himself of the basic comforts of life. So he led such an austere life, a barest minimum, that there is no plate to even receive alms. He receives alms in his palms. So simple. There are no clothes to put on. There is no place for him to stay. So here he is denying himself of the barest essentials of life, the most essentials. Now, where has he gone wrong? Obviously, the text says, the Guru says that by living a life of an ascetic, you cannot get rid of your desires. Everybody says you must live a life as simple as possible. Have you not heard that? Oh, I am leading a very simple life. In fact, we are very, we get awed at people who live a very simple life. Oh, he can afford a chauffeur-driven car, but he only takes public transports. Very nice to hear. But that by itself is any measurement of what is your mental state? Oh, he only has 2 pairs of clothes. One is on his body, another is hanging on the drying line. And when he gets this off, he wears that and this goes for the wash and on the drying line. So simple. Very, very simple. Now, what is the mistake the person here has done is, here the person has lived or practiced asceticism externally. Asceticism or being an ascetic doesn't mean you live a life of dispossession. He is living a life of dispossession externally. By living a life of dispossession or asceticism externally, there is no guarantee that the desires in you would disappear or the desires in you would wane away. No guarantee. Now, what is the true measure of asceticism? Obviously, it is not dispossession. As I've said, here is practicing asceticism externally. But real asceticism is not dispossession, but rather a detached feeling to your possessions. So your ascetic mentality or asceticism is not measured by physical possession or dispossession. It is measured by your detached feeling to your possessions. In effect, we have maintained it, we have learnt it, we have reiterated this idea that it is about cultivating that dispossessive attitude. Now here I would like to leave you all with a question to ponder and come back with your thoughts. We will take it up in a subsequent following session. The question is how to cultivate this attitude of dispossessiveness. I repeat the question. How to cultivate the attitude of dispossessiveness? Well, Jayama, is exactly the same question. You can also say how to shed the possessiveness. The question is how do you cultivate? Now, I don't want any answers at the moment. Please give it a thought. So asceticism is not measured by your possession or your enjoyment. So you may not possess it, and yet you may be having this possessive attitude vis-a-vis. You may possess it, and yet have dispossessive attitude. Strange as it may sound, that's the intricacies of spirituality. Majority are lost in the exterior of spirituality. I repeat, you may not possess it, you may not possess the world, but you may have that possessive attitude. Vis-a-vis, you may possess it, but you would have that beautiful dispossessive attitude. And that's the intricacies of spirituality. It's beautiful. But you need to know the difference. So the question is, what is the state of your mind? It doesn't matter whether you are in opulence. It doesn't matter whether you are in poverty. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what lifestyle you lead. Whether you live a life of Rama or you live a life of Lord Krishna. What was the life of Lord Rama, Shiva?
Sitting at his disposal, was a king, and he was everything was his
Sir?
At that time also he was away, and when he did not have all those things also he didn't miss.
Yeah.
When he was asked to go to the forest, he said, fine, it didn't make any difference. He took it up.
Yeah, very true. But when we compare Rama and Krishna, in what contrast, what is the contrasting life they have led?
Krishna was in everything. In fact, he was probably in everything. He was not like he.
Too much, huh? Jasti, everything was Jasti in his life. He had too much fun. Krishna had too much fun in his life. In fact, as comments are coming in, Gayatri Ma say Rama is Eka Patni. He was so what do you say? I am lost for the word, but Sita was everything for him. And for Krishna, he lived in Leela. As they say, Rasa Leela, isn't it? So here in a modern sense, we don't take it literally, but the way it is portrayed really doesn't matter. Whether you take a life of Rama or Krishna, whether you live a life of Sudama or Janaka, it really doesn't matter. It is not the exterior that determines, but their dispossessive attitude. So you may, even there are people who, when they do charity, when they donate, when they part with things for the needy, they have this possessive attitude. ரொம்ப கஷ்டமா இருக்கு to see that. Very, very painful to see people have such a strong possessive attitude to that act of service. They have to have that tag of name and recognition. As rightly said, they start labeling their donations. I've mentioned this before. Every time I think of it, I have convulsions within me. We never call it the Balaji temple in Hyderabad. We always call it the Enna Shiva? Teriyuma? So we call it the Birla Mandir. What is Birla? I don't know. The Pudu word is it? No, I am taking everything that's coming my way seriously. Maybe I thought there was another word called Birla. It's a Hindi word. No, never mind. Typo. So, Enna Shiva? So, you call it, it is known so much by the Birla Mandir. I can't understand what happens to the sanctity. I mentioned other day, it's such an unholy thought in the holy act. You put up a temple and then it is very, very sacrilegious. It is very, very unholy. So, what you must understand is you can't get rid of your desires through indulgence, nor can you get rid of desires through asceticism, austerity. Okay? So let's see what is the next verse says. Kurute Ganga Sagara Gamanam Vrata Paripalana Mathavadanam Jnana Vihinaha Sarvamatena Muktim na bhajati Janma Shatena Kurute Ganga Sagara Gamanam Vrata Paripalana Mathavadanam Jnana Vihinaha Sarvamatena Muktim na bhajati Janma Shatena. This verse he comes out very, very hard. Not as strong as the message was in the previous two verses, but this verse comes out very hard. Very, very important that we all take a note of the message here. He criticizes people, those who follow mechanical rituals. You may like it or not, you may accept it or not, you find every one of our lives is full of rituals, blind rituals, mechanical rituals, full of superstition. And where there is this blindness, mechanical aspect or superstition, there is zero intellect. Remember this, zero intellect. And these seem to take a precedence in the name of spirituality. These practices are flourishing in the name of spirituality. And he is attacking them head on. He is criticizing to a point where the message should come out very strong. Has come out. Whether it strikes you or not, it depends whether you are receptive to it. So what does the verse says? Kurute Ganga Sagara Gamanam. One visits where the Ganges meets the ocean. Very, very famous. It's considered as a holy site of pilgrimage where the Ganges meets the ocean. So people go. Engage. Where does it meet? I think a few points in India, isn't it? I think in Kanyakumari is one such point. Not sure. Enga sir, Seturaman garu, where does the Ganges meet the ocean? Kolkata, only Kolkata, huh? Nowhere else it meets, huh? I'm not wrong, yeah, correct Mavajima. It's also at Kanyakumari, there is this point where the Ganges meet. So it is considered very very holy. What it symbolizes is, it symbolizes the point of merging of the individual with the totality, where the individual loses its individualistic nature and gains the vast expanse of the totality, which is every river has its unique individuality. It's called by a name, it has an identity. But the moment the river merges with the ocean, what happens? It loses its nature, instantly it becomes a vast sheet of water, the ocean. It can become the Indian Ocean or the Atlantic or the Pacific, etc. So it is very symbolic of the individual losing his ego and merging with the state of realization, where you become the all-pervading Brahman. Rajima, another synonym for Brahman is all-pervasive reality, all-pervasive truth. Add to the list. I am remembering of some discussion I had with her. So incomplete irundhudu, complete panna avulda. All-pervasive truth. So, Kurute Ganga Sagara Gamanam Vrata Paripalana Mathavadanam, strictly observes vows, Vrata Paripalana Athava or Danam, does phenomenal charity, very, very charitable. Now look at this. Jnana Vihinaha Sarva Matena Muktim Na Bhajati Janma Shatena. Now underline this verse, this line. Jnana Vihinaha Sarva Matena. Devoid of this knowledge, not just my opinion, man. Sarva Matena, by all schools of thought. Muktim na bhajati janma shatena. You live a life like this for 100 years, there is no liberation for you. My God. We think we are doing great punya, great work in this janma. He says, 100 years you keep visiting where the Ganges meets the ocean, point 1. 100 years you live a life, you practice, what is this? Vratam, Vrata Paripalana. I don't know what Vratam is. Strictly observance of vows. Can anybody clarify what these vows are? Strictly Vrata Paripalana. Vasantama, can you clarify what does he mean by vows?
Well, you vow to take up fasting for a certain period of time.
Approp? Okay. And?
To fulfill your desires.
Any other vows?
You can always vow to maintain silence for some period of time.
Okay.
Vow taking that I will come.
Sleeping on the floor.
I will climb the steps to the temple.
Yes. Correct. Yeah. And Rajima has said carrying the kavadi. Oh my God, we have had a first-hand experience of seeing of people how Malaysia is a huge festival of Taipusam. Lord Subramanya, Taipusam. Oh my God, the entire Indian community converges and they go through. You can't fathom. I couldn't digest. You know, to the extent they go through carrying the kavadi, they pierce their skin. They oh my God, they pull chariots with hooks hooked onto their skin, and they walk barefoot for hundreds of kilometers, and they carry the Kavadi up the stairs of the famous Battu caves, and the above is the shrine of Lord Subramanya. So there are various, as you rightly said, yes, the Vratam of Shabarimala, yes, many take vows to fulfill their desires, they tonsure their head. Palukudam is carrying that pot of milk, is that what it is? Going around the temple 108 times, correct Sudhakar Garu. So the many vows people take, but what is the ultimate objective? There is invariably a very selfish desire there. Please remember that, please mark that. So you may take many vows, it is always revolving around a personal attachment or a personal sentiment. Or you may do charity 100 years. Now what is the mindset of people who are engaged in this? Now majority of the spiritually inclined people, they fall under this category. Either they are performing rituals. Now ritual here he tells of going where Ganges meets the ocean is only an implication of the various rituals people follow. It is just not going to a point where Ganges meets. All the ritualistic practices. So either people are caught up in ritualistic practices, or are they performing various vows, or they are into various charitable activities, trying to feed the poor, trying to relieve the suffering of the people. Whatever be the charitable works, all of that, he says, 100 years you do, no use. Now where is the pun? Where is the pun here? Now the pun or accent here is on the mindsets of the people who are engaged in these activities. Mark my words. The pun or accent is on the mindset of the people who are engaged in these activities, and they believe they don't need this higher knowledge. They think what they are engaged in is ultimate spiritual practice, and they believe all that they engaged in is good enough to give you salvation or moksha. And here it doesn't come any more direct than this. All what you do is of no use if you don't have this knowledge. Now these people may be very God-fearing, they are righteous people, they believe in doing all the right things, but that by itself is no use. In fact, just before I left home, I was sharing something with someone. I was saying, what is the use of all that they are doing? I was actually telling Vijaya, what is the use of all that that person is doing if he doesn't understand the value of this knowledge? Vijaya, you can recall what I said just now? A little earlier? Can you raise your thumb, Vijaya? Yes, we see now. Because they almost were sitting like statues. So what is the use of having all what you do and what vratas or practices, but if you don't have this knowledge, it is no good to you. 100 lives. So as I've said, this verse, he puts it very strongly. Now the knowledge when he says knowledge, here we're talking about the knowledge of Vedanta, the very essence of the know-how of life and living. So at the absolute level, the knowledge we're talking about is that this world is an illusion. That is the highest knowledge. At a relative level, you must understand the higher values of life. Now, it's a long way for all of us to relate to this knowledge at the absolute level. Now, can you tell me how do you relate to this knowledge at a relative level? Keeping in mind the context of the verse, the importance is that we must embrace this knowledge. Congratulate yourself, you have access to this knowledge. Now, what is your understanding of knowledge at the relative level? All of us must have this higher knowledge. What is your concept of having this knowledge at the relative level? Now, I will again take it as another question, please. Take another question. How do you explain Vedantic knowledge from a relative standpoint? This is the question. I repeat. How do you explain the concept of Vedantic knowledge from a relative standpoint? This is the question. Think about it. Give your points as to how this knowledge should be cultivated from a relative standpoint. Absolute standpoint is this world is an illusion. Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya. We don't need much clarification from absolute standpoint because all of us know it, none of us understand it. Tell me anyone who understands what that means. I accept, I also don't understand. So it is only intellectual. We have not come to that state where we say the world is illusion. But relatively, what is your concept of Vedantic knowledge? Capture all those ideas. So the people, as he says, Dhanam, they do charity, they give they very diligently, they give a certain percentage to charity. Whether it could be 5%, 10%, 15%, 20%. Or there are huge philanthropists who have decided to give all their wealth to charity. The real, the wealthy people, Bill Gates and who is the other chap? They both got together and started this club. Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett and Bill Gates got together with the intention of giving away all their wealth to charity. Now, why does he hold these practices in such lighter note? Any idea? Why does he say that 100 years you do is of no use? Why does he say that?
You do the charity.
Yes, sir. Chappan Satraman garu.
That is you give publicity for it. You are conscious that you are giving, and you are still possessive of the gift.
Sir,
No, he means
when Shankaracharya says in this verse
no, I
of
am
doing
saying the
charity,
opposite of
he
it.
means charity in the right
Even
sense.
if you do 100 years like
He
this,
doesn't mean it that
the way I am telling, you will. People generally people do it this way. That's what I mean.
now my question is, why is he putting these three practices on a very lighter note? What is the reason he is doing it?
Ah,
Almost he is giving no, see, almost he is giving them no importance. But why is he taking such an approach to these such renowned spiritual practices? Because rituals are very renowned, vows are very renowned, charitable acts are considered very auspicious or very spiritual. But here he simply dismisses it and says, not now.
do it
100 years is of no use to you, pa. Wake
with
up. But why does it take such a critical
basically
stand?
they don't have uh, with all good intentions. They are not doing more for ful- fulfilling their own.
No, no, see, again you are, no, no, again you are qualifying the act. For example, when they do charity, he is not talking of people who are doing with expectations. Let's say genuine charity you are doing. But he says mere charity alone will not give you liberation.
Because you have to be with the Brahman.
Why is he critical?
Reality is you have to understand. You have to be with the Brahman.
In fact, all those people who practice these, is there a thought of Brahman in them? Uh, they are ignorant, they are not aware. As Vasantama said, they practice various vows for many reasons, many selfish reasons. Hmm? Charity is done for punya. Yes, in fact, right, Gayatri, charity is done in the belief that they get some punya.
A fast track
Harishji is saying
just
all these are only at the physical level,
by doing some
not at the mental.
uh, pay payback for what you have done. Neutralize your sins.
Not on the
Just like the Muslim believe, by pelting stones at that at Mecca, they say seven stones. Huh? So as they keep marching towards, what do you call that in Mecca?
Kaaba.
Anyone can recall what do you call that? That pillar. Kaaba, isn't it? Is it Kaaba? Kaaba. Okay. Yeah, at Kaaba. So they have to hit 7 stones to that pillar as they go around circling that Kaaba, and they believe if they do that, their sins are purified. Again, in their religion, uh, that's their belief.
not realizing on the
Shaitan.
they are doing it because it was said
What is shaitan here?
why even if you take 100 janmas it's not going to happen because it said somebody else. It's not coming on or the own realization. So it can never work. Why you need 100 janmas is that? Because it's not on your own seeking or realization you do it. Because if somebody else said it, you are doing it.
Yes, Shiva. Again, it's a blindly following what a guru has said, or a prophet has said, or a Mahatma has said. So, whatever a guru says, the people are mechanically following. So, if tomorrow any guru says, for the next 30 days, we will chant Vishnu Sahasranamam in the morning. Oh, thank God, Guruji, you have said that it's a blessing, so we will chant Vishnu Sahasranamam for the next 30 days. And then after that, he will say, we will chant Shiva Puranam. Okay, oh, God, thank you, we will start chanting Shiva Puranam. And everybody says, oh, start doing little bit of charity. Oh, will do. Nobody has a head to question, why should I do it? Not that you are challenging them, but there is no intellect at all. In fact, the reason why he is holding these practices on a lighter note is just to give the importance of the knowledge in one's life. You don't understand, there is no value to this Vedantic knowledge because the gurus out there are not teaching this Vedantic knowledge in the way it should be taught. Now, I am not sitting there in judgment of people out there. It's not my business. I am putting my head to these scriptures, trying to understand what these great masters have said and trying to make it my own and part wherever there is an opportunity, where there is a demand. But go in search out from fill at the post, go around the world and find out how many of them are actually teaching this Vedantic knowledge in the way it has to be taught. In the name of spirituality, many other practices are flourishing. I am not sitting in judgment, don't get me wrong. But the knowledge is not being taught. I would question whether it's happening in the Shankara institutions, in the Shankar Mats itself, is it happening in the way it should happen? I do not know. It's a question mark. I will question everything. Not challenging, I would question. Is the knowledge is the direct means to liberation? In the Atma Bodha, again another text by Adi Shankaracharya, he says, whatever you do, ultimately fire is the direct means of cooking, he says. Without fire, you can't cook food. You can do all the preparation, but fire alone cooks food. Similarly, all the spiritual practices you engage in, ultimately, if you don't have this knowledge, your life, not this 100 janmas of genuine effort, will go in vain. It will not take you to liberation. Now, Harish ji has said beautifully, rituals are only external manifestations required by the lay people who have not realized. They are props. Props cannot be substitute for the real truth. They can only assist in the path. Now, rituals are not only meant for lay people, rituals are meant for even intelligent people, Harish ji. Even for you and me. Because everybody needs rituals. Like when we start the class, we start with an invocation, an invocatory prayer. It's a ritual. When I see you, I greet you, Hari Om. It's a ritual. When I see you, now perhaps the globe is embracing our culture of greeting someone with folded palms. It's a ritual. I put a tilak on my forehead. It's a ritual. Every ritual are an integral part of a spiritual man's life. So never ever should we look down on these ritualistic practices. But the question is, what do they convey? Because they are only conveying something. But if you perform them without understanding, they have no use. Like even the pelting of the stones It's only conveying something. They have a deeper meaning. They have a profound meaning. Very true. But when there is lack of intellection, when there is lack of knowledge, it serves no purpose. Yes, again another ritual is, why is the sanctum sanctorum in the temple intentionally kept dark? As I said, every aspect of religion is packed with rituals. Why do you go 3 times around a temple? Why do you break a coconut but not a muskmelon or a watermelon? Huh? Why do you only have to break a coconut in the temple? Why can't you carry watermelon to the temple? Huh? Tell me, Rajima. Why can't I break watermelon in the temple? Please tell me. If you don't like watermelon, let's say muskmelon. I want to take muskmelon as an offering to the Lord. Will Pujari object me from offering muskmelon? Now, first of all, I don't know about Pujari, but do you have an objection, Rajima? I'm waiting for an answer, Rajima. Okay. Now, why do you break a coconut in the temple? Coconut symbolizes ego. In fact, a coconut is an ideal fruit because every aspect of a coconut relates to the composition of an individual. How a coconut is constituted is exactly how an individual is composed of. Every aspect of the coconut, if you dissect it, is directly related to how an individual is constituted. Since we mention of it, I will mention a word or two on it. The outer layer of the coconut, when you pluck the coconut off the tree, the outer layer of the coconut is round and smooth. The round, smooth layer of the coconut symbolizes the gross body. And when you start using the tools to open up the coconut, then you have the very tough coir. The very tough coir which is tightly knit. So hard, so difficult to get rid of. And if any one of you have tried to remove the coir, it requires a lot of effort. You need the right tool and expertise, otherwise you can't remove the coir. So the coir symbolizes the subtle body which is full of desires and attachments. Innumerable desires, countless attachments. And then you have the hard shell. The hard shell is the causal body. Okay. The hard shell is the causal body, which is the vasanas. Now, when you take the coconut to the temple, even though you are expected to remove 90% of the coir, you are expected to leave a tuft, isn't it? So the tuft symbolizes you get rid of all your worldly desires, but when you go to the Lord, you are left with a last trace of desires, trace of few desires, which is symbolized with a tuft. A small tuft symbolizes you have got rid of the bulk of your worldly desires, but left with a few desires. So when you take that coconut in that form, so taking the coconut in the form with a small tuft with the rest of the coir removed means you are a highly evolved spiritual person where you have got rid of all your desires. There is no other interest, there is no other attachment, only thought is to get to the self. So you visit the temple in that preparedness to realize the self. There is no other interest. And when you do that and you offer the coconut to the pujari, then the pujari breaks the coconut and exposes the kernel. The kernel here is the Atman, the self, which is white and pure, immaculate. And then he removes the tuft. It is only the job or the role of the pujari to remove the tuft. You and I can't do it. Why is that? Because the pujari is the guru. The guru alone has the capacity to remove the last desire in you. You can only reach that point and thereafter surrender. The guru does thereafter. He takes care of the last desire, which is the removal of the last coir. And when the tuft or the coir is removed, then you find the three dots. The three dots symbolizes the two eyes and the third eye, which is the eye of wisdom known as the Jnana Chakshu, which symbolizes that you now have that inner vision, that inner perception of the self. You have the divine vision, the divine perception, which is nothing but self-realization. So there is a little other interpretation as well, but that is not relevant for now. But just to mention why a coconut is carried to a temple. So each one of us have an obligation to convey this deeper meaning to our children, educate them. Because without educating them, you mechanically follow. If your children ever asked you why not carry muskmelon or watermelon than a coconut, I'm sure we didn't have that complete understanding, isn't it? Or why don't we take drumsticks as offering? I had bumper crop of drumsticks. Let me take drumsticks as offering to the Lord. Nobody seemed to understand what's going on. But here is a deeper significance. So rituals are important, but done without meaning, they become mechanical. So the verse is trying to emphasize the importance of gaining this Vedantic knowledge. So the question I had left for you all is, what's the question? Vasantama, can you read out the question for us? How do you explain Vedantic knowledge from a relative standpoint? Correct. Again, end of the day, the desires has not left. How do you assume that? The verse doesn't say it, Rajima, but the implication of your drawing that the desires have not left you. How do you conclude? I know, I'm sorry, I don't know whether you are in Maunavrat today. என்ன ராஜிமா சீரியஸ்லி Maunavrat? How do we say that a desire to know more? I didn't answer. The question is how do we decipher, how do we gather that desires have not left? Because the previous two verses 15 and 16 he said the band of desires, the noose of desires leaves not. Adengappa enough. Shiva, tell Amma in the house to make nice coconut halwa. And the coconut halwa சாப்பிட்டு நான் வீட்டுக்கு வரேன். நாளைக்கு இல்ல நாளான்னைக்கு காலையில நான் வரேன். அம்மாட்ட சொல்லுங்க கோகோனட் ஹல்வா சாப்பிட்டு நான் வரேன். சரிங்களா? நீங்க தான் டிசைர் பிளான் பண்ணீங்க மனசுல. I didn't have any such funny thought. நீங்க தான் desire to have more coconut. அந்த கோகோனட் நான் கோகோனட் ஹல்வா பண்ணேன் அவ்வளவுதான். என்னம்மா அவ்வளோ பெரிய வார்த்தை சொன்னீங்க? That is only entitled for gurus to say that we are all fools. So they only have the liberty. நீங்க எடுத்துட்டீங்க அந்த லிபர்ட்டி எடுத்துட்டீங்க. and you're calling everybody mood aha. No, I'm just kidding about that. So how do we conclude, how do we gather that the desires have not left? Correct, Jayama? The fact that he says, yes, okay, Vasantama, solungo.
When we do all this devoid of only when we are devoid of knowledge, that means still our desires have not left.
Okay, but how does No, I'm trying to examine your statement. By just saying devoid of knowledge, does it tantamount to having not exhausted your desires?
Exhausted desires.
Yes, sir.
I'm only trying to understand the cause and effect in the statement. But see, by that statement, can I conclude that desires are still there? I have no knowledge.
Your mind is.
But how do you say desires are not burnt off?
Then you are devoid of desire. You feel that is the deciphering desires have left. Your mind is going. You are going inner, not going outer. You are not. You are.
Sethuramanji is giving new commentary on Bhajgovindam. Sir, we will write, we will publish your new commentary, sir. Vasantama, can I request you to read the translation for me?
Strictly observes war vows, or does charity. All these are all desires only. Devoid of knowledge, truth, by all schools of thought, he attains no liberation even in 100 lives.
Sorry.
He attains no liberation.
Now, can you
even in 100 lives?
Concentrate on the last statement you read.
Lives only if you have desires. Vasanas. That is how you are very clear that the desires are still there. Because if for any reason desires are exhausted, there is no more further birth, yeah. So instead of putting directly that you have exhausted desires, he says 100 life you will still have desires. Please realize the futility of these practices. So he indirectly puts it. That is how you decipher. You get it? He doesn't put it directly, but indirectly you gather. So because we understand liberation as exhaustion of desires. 100 janmas means nariya desires are there, which is exactly the same thing he is maintaining. So if you go back, when I did verse 14, I said to you all that verses 15, 16 and 17 is talking about spiritual practitioners who are very genuine, but they are going about in a wrong way of exhausting their desires. 15, 16, 17 and the 18th verse, which is the next verse, he is talking of a person who is genuine and he goes about in the right way, which results in the exhaustion of desires. He tries to portray that dispassion is not a myth, renunciation is not a myth, it is very much possible to live a life of renunciation. So he picturizes, he captures what it is to live a life of dispassion. Who is a man of dispassion is conveyed in the 18th verse. So this is the thought flow. So as I've said, this verse comes out very hard just for us to take a particular note and take a stock of where you are progressing spiritually and make a conscious measure to imbibe this higher knowledge so that it gives a serious direction to one's life. So a life without knowledge is directionless. Knowledge is that which gives you a goal, a direction. That's how knowledge, a life without knowledge is directionless. I repeat, a life without knowledge is directionless. So the knowledge is that which gives you a goal, which gives you a direction. And whenever you talk of knowledge, it is the intellect. The intellect and knowledge go hand in hand. It gives you a clear-cut goal, and when you have a goal, you have a direction. Example, GPS, destination, path. When you're in a GPS, the moment you choose a destination, the destination of the goal, the moment you click destination, instantly you have the roadmap, the path, the track to get there. So a life without knowledge is directionless, is meaningless. That's the gist or takeaway from verse 17. Okay? Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate.
ओम शांति
गुरुभ्यो नमः
शांति
हरिः ओम्
शांति। हरि ओम।
हरि ओम गुरुजी हरि ओम गुरुजी
हरि ओम। हरि ओम। हरि ओम ताता। हरि ओम।